Hi again. We're on page 91 of Three Worlds Plan of Redemption. Here Barbour is still developing his thought that there are parallel dispensations, the Jewish and the Christian, and they're both the same length, 1845 years. He says, the measure of the first dispensation under the 12 tribes was 1845 years, as we will show. That dispensation began at the death of Jacob and ended at the death of Christ. Prior to the death of Jacob, the one-man age obtained, that is, one man represented God's church. Abraham was alone, as was Noah. Isaac was the only son chosen, then Jacob. Until Jacob's death, his children were not recognized as the 12 tribes of Israel, but simply as the sons of Jacob and brethren of Joseph. At his death, a radical change occurs. It is no longer one man, but the 12 tribes of Israel that represent God's people. And they continued to do so until Shiloh came, and with him the one-man age began again, Christ and his body, all members of the one body, etc. Between the death of Jacob and the death of Christ, events occurred in their history, such as the Exodus, the giving of the law, which was added because of transgression, their entrance into the promised land, captivities, etc. But no change occurred. The 12 tribes remained the 12 tribes and the representatives of God's church through all their ups and downs. And on the deathbed of Jacob it was said, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall be the gathering of the people. Genesis 49 verse 10. And it was then that they were first recognized in these words, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. That's 49:28 of Genesis. The chronology from the death of Jacob to the death of Christ is as follows. The death of Jacob occurred 232 years after the covenant was made with Abraham. For at that time Abraham was 75 years old. Isaac was born 25 years after, or when Abraham was 100. Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob was born. Jacob lived 147 years. 25 and 60 and 147 make 232. As from the covenant to the day they left Egypt was 430 years, and from the covenant to the death of Jacob was 232 years, the time from the death of Jacob to the day they left Egypt was 198 years. And then he has a table to the death of Christ, and it all adds up to 1845 years. This 32 years comes thus. Christ was crucified in the spring of AD 33, on the day after the evening of the Passover, and hence on the 15th day of the first month, Jewish ecclesiastical time. And as the Jewish ecclesiastical year begins in the spring, he was therefore crucified 15 days after the Jewish year, corresponding to AD 32, ended. Hence only 32 years and 15 days Jewish time had passed on this side of the Christian era at his death. There's good evidence that Christ was 30 in the autumn of AD 29, or 6 months before our AD 30 began. Hence, in the spring of AD 33, he was 33 years old and 6 months. The chronology is pretty much still the same as to Christ's life, but the figures from the Old Testament nowadays, the Watchtower hasn't adhered to. It was remarked in the early part of this chapter that the Jewish dispensation ended with a harvest. Lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. I send you to reap that whereon you bestowed no labor. And as proof that this harvest was the closing work of the Jewish age and belonged exclusively to them, we give Christ's testimony that he was sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And further, he would not permit his reapers to go to any other. Go not in the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. As proof that this age also ends with a harvest, I refer you to Matthew 13, or the parable of the tares and wheat. Let both grow together until the harvest. The harvest is the end of the world, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares. A harvest is the time of gathering fruit, but the work of the gospel is sowing seed. Hence you are not to mistake and suppose that the end of the world ion or age has been the gospel itself. The end of the Jewish world, ion, came at the first advent of Christ. Now once in the end of the world or age hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, according to Hebrews 9 verse 26. And the end of the gospel, ion, comes at the second advent of Christ. What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come. The harvest to the Jewish age was the 3.5 years of Christ's ministry, and the harvest to this age is also one of 3 years and a half to transpire during the personal presence of Christ, not in the flesh, but in the character in which he comes to his spiritual house. And all the details of the closing up of that age have their parallels in the closing up of this age. And as from the death of Jacob to the death of Christ was 1845 years, so from the spring of AD 33 to the spring of AD 1878 will be 1845 years, at which time they will have received double. And when blindness begins to be turned away from them, the fullness of the Gentiles will have come in, and the gospel dispensation close. But we must now drop this subject, as 2 or 3 other lines of argument must first be presented before this part of the double can be understood by the reader. And in the next section he goes to the Jubilee, which they also found chronologically significant as to that generation. So you can clearly see the parallels lead to the conclusion that 1878 was the harvest. Why is 1878 the beginning of the Jews' restoration? So I'm putting in a link to what predictions did C.T. Russell make? Some, of course, based on all of this that was Barbour's actually, about the year 1914. He actually made 7 clear predictions, so we'll put a link into that video. Next time, the Jubilee and its chronological significance.